Hi, welcome to Pauline Interviews. This is part two. Our topic is a near-death experience, and I'm interviewing Diane Goble, who had a near-death experience back in 1971. In those days, people didn't know much about near-death experience, so I'm sure, Diane, for you it was quite a shock. I mean, you'd never read about it or heard about it or anything like that.
No.
So how did, well, first off, we talked about that you were an atheist, so it came as quite a surprise that you weren't dead when you left your body.
Believe me, it was a surprise.
Yeah. So, did you fear death before that experience?
Probably, but not blatantly. I mean, it wasn't.
You were
quite-
young, so you weren't thinking about death. You were in your 30s.
Yeah, I was 30, and
Yeah.
you know, life was great. And well, I had surgery the year before,
Mhm.
and I thought at that time that I might, you know, what if I died during that surgery?
Yeah.
Then it came up, and I was very afraid
Mhm.
of having that surgery. Yeah, I did have a lot of fear of death.
Of death, yeah. And so after this experience, how do you feel about death now? It doesn't exist.
Anytime.
Anytime.
You know, because it doesn't exist. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
I don't want to leave my family,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Mhm.
for myself, I look forward to wrapping up my work here
Yeah.
and moving on to the rest of my work over there.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, there's a second of dying, and then I'm
On the
back
other side.
on the other side, so no.
Okay. Well, let's go back to 1971, and after this happened, you were married, and you had
Three.
3 children, and after you came back and you found out you were still alive, how did you feel? How did you, I mean, what did you say? Was it a dream? I mean, how did you feel? How did you, what did you think had happened to you? I don't even know how to ask you the question.
I know,
So.
and I don't know how to answer it. I was in shock. You know, talk about
Mhm.
post-traumatic shock. I was in such a state of shock, I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened to me. I couldn't have told the story about my experience then, because it didn't make sense to me, because it was so far out of my realm of
Mhm.
thought that I
Out of reality. It had no reality.
Yeah, no. You know,
Mhm.
how could this be? And having gone to churches previously, I was a Catholic for a long time, and, you know, had read the Bible, and, you know, and
There was no reference that you saw.
No, it wasn't what I had.
I think it got taken out years ago.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, when I went back later, I found so many references.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't people realize that people have been
Oh.
having these experiences for the last 5,000 to 10,000 years? I don't
Yeah.
know. You know, it's written about, but they didn't have a word for it.
Ah.
So spiritual experiences that people have even recorded in the Bible, were not talked about in that way. Paul, what the heck happened to him on the road?
Uh-huh.
You know, he apparently had a near
And
death
Jesus got murdered and came back.
Jesus, yeah, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
Muhammad
Mhm.
and Buddha, and
Mhm.
it happened, but we
Mhm.
didn't know what it was, so we called
Yeah.
it a miracle. And
Mhm.
they suddenly thought they were,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some prophet or whatever,
Yeah.
which that never occurred to me,
Yeah.
that I had this experience in order to become, you know, I was
Spiritually
just-
elevated.
Yeah, no, you know, I was
Uh-huh.
just this normal person who had had this accident and a weird experience that couldn't be explained, and nobody wanted to hear about.
Well, when you came back with all this knowledge, you weren't ready to integrate that into your life yet. No. Now, who was the first person that you expressed this experience to?
Well, my husband,
Okay, so what did you say to your husband, and what did he say to you?
I don't remember,
Uh-huh.
you know, he says that I said that I went somewhere, and
Uh-huh.
he doesn't recall any more than that, but I
Mhm.
didn't ask him for 20 years, long enough after
Mhm.
our lives had fallen apart because of it.
Yeah.
Um,
In what way did you somehow became different, and he didn't understand you? Or?
Yeah, you know, it's like something happened to me that I couldn't explain, and nobody wanted to hear about it, so I had no way of processing it. It was all in here, and I couldn't get it out. So when you hold, you know, when something weird, bizarre, or terrible happens to
Yeah.
you, you need to express it.
Did you think of going to a psychologist, or?
They would have locked me up.
Oh.
You know, back then, when you talked about things like that, they thought you were nuts.
Mm.
And, you know, people even said to me, you better not let people hear you talk about that.
Uh-huh.
And it scared me.
Did you mention it to how old were your children, old enough for you to express? No.
No, they were, I
Uh-huh.
don't know, 6, 5,
Yeah.
or, you know, in that age.
Did,
They weren't even in school.
how did it change your everyday life? I mean, did you get depressed? Were you sleepless? How did it physically affect you?
Physically, I don't remember how it affected me. It changed me in ways that I can't even explain, enough so that my husband thought I was nuts. I changed in some way that affected him. Eventually, you know, this happened in 71, by 75 we were divorced. We broke up a couple years before that, and a lot of bad things happened, and it was not good. He took the kids, and
anyway, you went through a dark night of the soul after having this, yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't explain it. I couldn't express it, and then I stopped trying to talk about it, and really didn't talk about it for 15 years until I picked up a book and went, "Oh my God, this happened to other people."
That was
and then it all
Dr. Raymond Moody's book?
No, it wasn't. I didn't come across his until years after that.
Oh.
This was Ruth Montgomery.
Oh, Ruth Montgomery,
Strangers
yes.
Among Us.
Yes.
She talked about walk-ins, and I thought, the walk-in thing doesn't fit right.
No.
But something happened.
Yeah.
So that led me to further study, and
Yeah.
then gradually found out that this is, you know, happening to people, and it started to be studied. And of course now I'm involved in the study of it,
Yes.
or have been for many years.
So I remember you saying you came in with all this experience, I mean, all this knowledge, but when you came back into this body, you weren't able to use it because you were so traumatized by what happened to you. So when were you eventually able to use all that wonderful knowledge that they said, I'm giving you this knowledge to give to others to help the world?
That was a long process, and what happened was I ended up going back to school. There's a story behind that, but going back to college to study psychology to figure out what was going on in my own head, and to try to understand this whole thing. So I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and I had worked in a battered women's shelter and realized that I wanted to be a counselor, and that's what led me into psychology. And then, you know, progress from there. I had no ambition beyond being a mother when this happened to me. And now all of a sudden I'm studying this, and I'm you know, trying to figure out what happened and trying to help other people deal with it. And when I graduated from college was when I had a reawakening of the experience, because again, I hadn't talked about it. Had I talked about it while I was in college, I might have ended up really being a researcher, but it still was buried. So it was still, that was 1983, it was 1987 or 8 when I finally opened Ruth Montgomery's book. And then it started coming out, and I started talking about it, because it all came back to me as if it happened yesterday. And, you know, it's been over 40 years now, and it's still right here. I can see it.
So how do you feel about it now that you've been through the dark night of the soul, and you've studied, and you more or less understand what happened to you? Are you glad you went through that experience, and how has at this point has changed your life? It seems like you're able to help others now with what you've learned.
Oh, how do I feel about it? Well,
are you glad it happened?
I'm glad it happened, because it certainly changed me. And I would like it to happen again, because I'd
Felt
like,
so good.
yeah, I mean, I'd like,
Yeah.
you know, further clarification about some
Right.
things.
Does it ever come to you in your dreams? I mean, do you ever relive any of it? Or-
No.
No.
I've written about it enough that I've purged myself of it. I've written a number of books, so, and I have a website and a blog, and
And we're going to talk about that in part 3, because if you had gotten help back in 1971, you could have gone.
it would have been very
It
different.
would have been very different. You wouldn't have had to suffer so much. But so because of what you went through, you're now helping people. And a lot of times I find that's true. People have gone through a difficult time in their lives. They're able to come out of it, and then because of their experience, that they can help other people. They can be, what do you call it when people are trailblazers? They can be a trailblazer. Yeah. Well, thanks, Diane, for sharing again, and we'll do part 3. Thank you for watching Pauline Interviews. Our topic's near-death experience. In part 3 with Pauline and Diane Goble, we're going to talk about if you've ever had a near-death experience. There are lots of information out there. There is scientific studies being done, research being done, And there's also a lot of support groups, and there are books, and Diane's authored several of them, and we'll talk about that in part 3. Thanks for watching Pauline Interviews.